Well, hello everyone. I'm Marianne Meed Ward, Mayor of the City of Burlington, and I would like to welcome you all to another edition of Burlington Matters, where we assemble a local panel of people to talk about issues that we think you're going to be interested in, give you information, and make sure that you know what's going on in the city, whether at City Hall or in the community. And we have another outstanding panel assembled for you again today. And we are going to talk about the number one issue on everyone's minds, not just here in Burlington, but really across the country. And that is affordable housing. The city has been working for quite a while on an affordable housing strategy to look at areas where the city can influence the provision of affordable housing, where we can advocate to other levels of government or partner with the private sector and the nonprofit sector. So we're going to talk all about that. We have a housing strategy that has been presented to committee and council recently, and of course went through quite a number of months of community opportunity for input and feedback. So I am thrilled to be joined today by Alison Enns, who is our Manager of Policy and Community in our Community Planning Division at the City of Burlington, and Kate Hill-Montague, who is our Coordinator of Planning Policy, also in the Community Planning Department at the City of Burlington, who have been really leading this initiative internally and with our community for it's got to be at least a year and a half now. So I'm going to start with you, Alison, to talk to us a little bit about where this is at right now, and then we'll get into some of the meat of the details. Go ahead.
And thanks. I'll just say thank you so much for having us, Mayor Meed Ward. Yeah, we just brought our housing strategy, the culmination, like you say, of about 18 months of work. It was back in January of I cannot believe it, 2021, when we brought the terms of reference to council and started to spell out what we were going to do in terms of addressing a big strategic plan direction and a vision to focus direction about housing. Housing was identified through the public engagement in the strat plan work many years ago. It was almost something that figured into every response that team received through the engagement. You know, where are my children going to live? What are we going to do about accommodating a broader range of families, of people in Burlington? So your question was simply, where are we? Well, we have presented a housing strategy to committee, culmination of a lot of technical work, quite a bit of planning insight, a ton of engagement, and it's all rolled into a pretty dense but a smallish document that will give us a roadmap for the future.
Thanks for that, Alison. And I want to turn it now to Kate to talk about where this goes from here. And, you know, does this mean, as residents may ask, you know, we've solved affordable housing in Burlington. Where does this go? What are the next steps?
For sure. So as Alison mentioned, we now have this housing strategy that we brought forward to committee just recently, the Community Planning and Regulation and Mobility Committee, and it's going to be contemplated by council this month as well. And what the housing strategy really provides is a roadmap for how we can address housing needs for residents now and in the future. So it really is this roadmap that provides a series of housing objectives for the City of Burlington, how we can move closer to the vision for housing in Burlington. And there are 12 actions that can get us there or move us a little bit closer to that vision. It also identifies what the role of the City of Burlington is, because as we know, we operate within a whole continuum of housing, from the federal government to the region to the province to private and non-for-profit housing providers. So a little bit about where the city sits within that structure is included in the housing strategy, as well as there's an implementation plan attached to the housing strategy that talks about how and when each of these actions might be implemented. It also identifies things like priority actions and quick wins and elements like that. So really the housing strategy provides that roadmap about how to get us a little bit closer to that vision of diversifying housing, meeting the needs of residents now in the future, and a little bit about the implementation of how we'll get there.
That's great, thanks. So let's dive into the 12 recommendations, and maybe let's start with the quick wins. I'm sure residents are keen to know, what can we do uh, right away to help foster affordable housing, recognizing that some things will take a bit longer to land. So maybe I'll start with you, Alison, in terms of just a couple of highlights on the quick wins as identified in the strategy.
I'll start with the more obvious ones. A lot of our of our early quick wins actually are accomplished through council saying, this is our strategy. It helps us confirm our role. And Kate did just a great job explaining, we really needed to be clear about what the region's role was, what the city's role could be. And that's all in service of not duplicating effort at any level. So one of the quick wins was just exactly that, describing the role. The embedded in understanding that role is sort of setting the vision. And I don't know if we've said it yet, but it was the result of a lot of discussion, and the headline of the vision is everyone is welcome in Burlington. And that's deliberately in larger font. And then we get into the more nuanced part of it that says Burlington's a city where all current and future residents have access to the housing options that meet their needs at all stages of life and that are attainable at all income levels. So wrapping those two together, we're demonstrating a first quick win. But maybe Kate might be a great to dive into some that actually require a bit more on the ground work.
Certainly, go ahead, Kate.
Sure. So there is one other action in the housing strategy that just by virtue of council saying, yes, this is our strategy, will actually be completed. And that is the targets that are set out in the housing strategy. I believe that's action 4 of our strategy. The targets are actually appended to the end of the strategy, but really what the targets are about is building on the targets that the region has set out around proportions of affordable housing, but then also providing a little bit more guidance about the mix of housing as well. So those targets are another thing that just by virtue of approving the housing strategy, we have those set out. There would be additional work if we wanted to enshrine those in our official plan, but we have them. We'll have them already set out in our housing strategy. A few other elements that are identified as quick wins. One is to work with our colleagues in development review to find ways to incorporate the objectives of the housing strategy while we're sort of going about the business of implementing all of those actions, which some will take longer than others. So making sure that we have a way through the development process to make sure that we're giving regard to the objectives of our housing strategies as quickly as possible. And then a few sort of ones that will take a little bit longer than just saying, yes, this is our strategy, are elements along the lines of making sure we use the findings of our housing strategy project, which was, as Alison said, an 18-month project that required a great deal of technical work and a lot of public consultation to inform our comprehensive zoning bylaw review process. So making sure we take all the great things we found out about the status of housing need and opportunity in Burlington and making sure that they're considered through the comprehensive zoning bylaw review process is another element. And then one other one is a little bit along the lines of the Burlington Lands Partnership and some of that work that's currently underway, identifying these surplus lands or underutilized lands in Burlington are that could be used to provide housing. So those are some of the quick wins that are identified in the housing strategy.
That's great. I want to pick up on a couple of ideas, particularly the surplus land, which is often around school sites. But I'll come back to that in a minute. And just, as a council member's perspective, two of the key opportunities that I see for the city is what you've touched on in terms of how do we plan our communities, working with people in development review when applications come forward. So we have a role to play in approving developments, but also incentivizing. And we'll come back to that piece because one of the things that we've talked about that I think is a quick win is around inclusionary zoning, which is being discussed certainly all over the region here beyond Burlington and maybe even beyond that. But we can also, as a city, buy land, and then when we do that, we're able to control what happens there, whether it whether it stays a park, whether if it's a former school site, for example, whether it becomes a community center like we're planning with Robert Bateman High School, or for new sites that might come up. So we know Pearson High School was closed several years ago. It hasn't yet been declared surplus by the Halton District School Board, but if such a time came along, the city, there's an order of who gets to bid, but we're before the private sector at the city. So we have been talking about, through our Burlington Lands Partnership, having a surplus school site strategy that would really dovetail with us with a land strategy. So if we can buy land and then we can determine who, how things get built. So so maybe talk to us a little bit. Maybe I'll go to you, Alison. So we've got the surplus land piece, which we may have kind of covered, but I'm really interested as well in discussing further the inclusionary zoning piece and unpacking for people what that means and how it would work.
Great. Yes, I'll start with the surplus school sites. So we've already hit on it, but there was a staff direction from council to say, let's be strategic and do some research, understand what best practices look like around the province in terms of how other municipalities deal with this really interesting situation where you have a very limited amount of time to make a very important decision for the community about an existing community resource, a school, for example. So in the July committee cycle, we'll be bringing a report that's really a technical memo covering, here are all of the things you need to be thinking about when you're going to embark on building that bigger strategic policy for land. So this will include a bit about best practices. What are other people doing? How can engagement feed into that same process? How can we make the community a part of this? When is it appropriate, and how can we just build that into our normal processes? And really that technical work sets the framework, and going forward, the city will absolutely need to be building that larger strategic approach to dealing with land. But I'm looking forward to having that discussion with committee, and it brings me back to committee several weeks ago when we were talking about the housing strategy, and the city manager sort of described the housing strategy as as a number of our other strategies, sort of as an organizing framework, a way that you just automatically build in these discussions without even having to think about it. And it kind of reminds me too of how we'll be embedding those thoughts into the development review process. It's just a matter of course here now in Burlington that we'll be thinking about these things every time we can add value to it. So what are those targets? How are you helping us achieve them? And what are we trying to achieve with strategic land purchases and building those things out? So that addresses the Burlington Lands Partnership part. And then inclusionary zoning, it absolutely forms part of the scope of the larger housing strategy. It's been embedded. We've provided a report in January. And I guess this would be a good time to say, what do I mean when I say inclusionary zoning? Planners are notorious for just saying words like that and expecting everyone to understand what we mean. Inclusionary zoning is a tool that's available to municipalities right now in the land surrounding our major transit station areas. So in Burlington, think Burlington Go, Aldershot Go, and Appleby Go. We can build a policy framework that says, when you have a development of a certain size, we're going to require that as part of the approvals for that development that you deliver a number of attainable, sometimes they can be even affordable units alongside of your market rate units. So it's a new tool in Ontario. It's not a new tool in a lot of other places. And there are lots of good places to go for, you know, how's it gone? What's gone really well in terms of sort of building out what our policy framework will be. That work is ongoing. It's very much tied to our major transit station area specific planning work that's ongoing right now. That's the place where we say, from a planning perspective, from a community perspective, here's what's appropriate here. And then we layer in the discussions about inclusionary zoning. So that work continues in the background and will continue.
Yeah, it's a really important, it's an important tool, and it's got to be obviously implemented well. And we certainly have heard from members of the development community that they are supportive of this tool, which I'm thrilled about, with lots of caveats around how to make it happen. And so that the study work, as you mentioned, Alison, is ongoing. So maybe Kate, I'll turn to you and see what happens next. There's some policies, I think, that have to be approved before it can be put into use, and that is still to come. The study is underway. So where is that tool, which is kind of a mini study within the larger housing study? Where is that at?
Yeah, so as Alison mentioned, in January, we came forward with our it was called the Inclusionary Zoning Initial Report. And so that piece of work came from the technical work that was undertaken for the housing strategy. And that piece of work was about sort of what Alison was speaking to, is what's the policy tool? How does it work? When can we apply it? So around our GO stations in Burlington's case, what are examples of best practices, and where has it worked really well? What's worked well, what hasn't? So that piece of work has been completed. We're now moving into another key deliverable that was set out at the beginning of the housing strategy project, which is something called a municipal assessment report. And what that really is it's step one in getting an inclusionary zoning policy framework. And what that piece of work is about is trying to determine if it's feasible to have inclusionary zoning in Burlington, if it's feasible from a development perspective. So ensuring that if these policies are brought forward, that the developments would still be something that would still be economically viable. So that's the piece of work that's currently underway. And that's really step one. It's set out as a requirement in the Planning Act. It also has to be peer reviewed. So the piece of work will be done in collaboration with our development partners and all of those sorts of things. And then it'll be additionally peer reviewed. And so that's really step one. We would then move forward to the other steps that are set out in the Planning Act, things like ensuring we have enabling policies in our official plan, and then making sure that we would develop that, the bylaw related to inclusionary zoning. And that's through that work, we would find out what size of building is appropriate, where is it appropriate, is it all of our MTSAs, some of them, none of them, that's what the work will determine.
And just to unpack that last acronym for folks, MTSA, Major Transit Station Area, we have 3 of those around our GO stations where we expect to have that high density. So it is a really important point that we're looking uniquely at each one of those instead of applying the same standard in terms of inclusionary zoning. So would it be fair to say that work, the tool, whatever we end up doing with it is probably not going to be available to us until sometime in 2023, fair to say, or would it even be this year?
I'll chime in.
Alison?
Thank you, Mayor Board. I think it's an interesting time, and there's so much going on in the housing sphere. We highlighted it at the end of our discussion at committee with a re-elected provincial government really set on talking about housing. I think there's a moment of collecting our thoughts and understanding what's coming down too. There's probably a few opportunities to make sure that everything we're doing is in lockstep, and because everyone wants to achieve the same thing, we want to be creating more housing units. We want to be making sure that supply is diverse, and we're not doing anything to undermine that. So I think it will be likely later. 2023 is likely where we're headed.
That's great, and it is important to work with our partners at other levels of government. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because we certainly recognize in the strategy that some of what we do will be either advocacy to or partnership with. Both are important. Actually, I'll take this opportunity to plug something that the Ontario Big City Mayors did at our meeting on Friday. We are asking for an emergency meeting with the province to discuss issues of chronic homelessness, mental health, and addictions, which are often so intertwined. And actually, we had the support and partnership of the Ontario business improvement areas, because many of those areas are located in downtowns, where folks that are chronically homeless gravitate to, because they have a lot of amenities, they have shops and services, and so our businesses are being really asked to provide mental health supports, homelessness supports to people, because they care, and they arrive literally on their doorstep. And so we're saying, look, this is not the best way to serve the people who need help. We need that emergency meeting, and so it is part of the overall housing continuum that there's really at the end of the day no excuse for anyone being unhoused in Canada. We're a wealthy nation, and it'll just take political will and resources and strategy to move this forward. So that was one one initiative where we're certainly prepared to be partners in that, and we have a homelessness strategy through the region of Halton. And maybe I'll come to you, Kate, to talk a little bit about what the the regional responsibility is here, because folks may not understand that interplay either, what the city does, what the region does, and then our federal and provincial partners. But we certainly know that no one level of government, nor the private sector, nor the nonprofit housing sector can do this on their own. We all have to work together, and sometimes that'll be through partnership, and sometimes through advocacy. So maybe Kate, I'll turn to you to talk about the region's role, not only in homelessness, which is on the extreme end of the housing continuum, right, to making sure that there are affordable units.
In terms of what the region's role is, so they are the provider of housing. They provide affordable housing. They're the ones that receive government funding and then provide affordable housing, as well as other services that help to house people. So that is really the role of the region. As a lower tier municipality, so the city of Burlington, we don't have direct responsibility for housing, but part of the work the housing strategy undertook was to identify what our role could be. And it's identified really clearly in Action 2, which is that we can be a connector. So we can do things like advocate upwards towards our provincial and federal governments to make sure that our residents are getting the support they need. We can work with the region to do that, but we can also connect to our private and not-for-profit housing providers who are responsible for building housing, to ensure that we are connecting them to the programs and the resources they need, and also just connecting providers and other levels of government together to make sure we're all working together to make sure that all of our residents have what they need in terms of housing now and in the future.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. We are in our last couple of minutes here, so I just want to turn to you, Alison, for a quick, you've got about a minute and a half, and I'll turn to you, Kate, for any last thoughts on the housing strategy. Go ahead.
I'll just say the housing strategy has a really solid basis and foundation on our new OP. Our new OP really sets our urban structure and where we should grow and where we're going to see significant change. I think that's it's been a really great stepping stone and a place to start to explore options as we work through our zoning bylaw. There are so many things happening right now at the City of Burlington, and I think going back to that sort of organizing structure and how things all fit together, I think, whether it's from climate change to housing to intensification, I think the city is doing a really good job at every moment connecting in. and maybe pass it off to Kate.
Sure, go ahead, Kate.
Thanks. I think Alison covered so much of it. I think just a moment to be grateful that we were at this stage, and it's a really exciting moment for the city of Burlington. You know, once the housing strategy is approved, we're going to be in this exciting moment where we move on to phase 2 and we get to start implementing the housing strategy, working with all the other objectives of the city, working with all of our government and not-for-profit and development partners to really move towards a city where everybody has the housing options they need at every age and stage of life.
Well done. We are now out of time, and just a couple of thoughts from me around, the importance of this work. This is a topic on everyone's mind, and that's good news. Alison, you mentioned this. We're a kind of a pivotal time where every level of government, every mayor that I talk to, councillors are talking about this issue, and by talking about it, it shows that it's at the top of our agenda to do something about it. We each have a different role to play, in many ways complementary, but it's really gratifying to see this work come together for the city of Burlington, which has been underway for quite some time, and the vision at the end of the day is making sure everyone is welcome here in Burlington, that everyone can find a home to live in that they can afford for their income, and that's no easy task. But we do have tools, and certainly as we get into the work, I'm sure more opportunities will arise for how we can address this key issue of our time. So thanks to you both, Alison Enns and Kate Hill-Montague from our Community Planning Department at the City of Burlington, who have been leading the initiative to develop Burlington's housing strategy. I'm Marianne Meed Ward, signing off for another issue of Burlington Matters. Thanks for watching.